Hey guys, it's Mr. Mini Painter and today I'm painting Tauriel from the Legolas and Tauriel set. To start off, I primed the model black, and what I really love about these models, as Legolas as well as this one, is that they are fully based. They have a beautiful base with a tree log on which you're standing on. They have a beautiful action pose, so it's a lot of fun to paint. So to start off with, I'm starting with the face and hands and by using Night Questor Flesh. I want the elves to have a very light skin tone, and Night Questor Flesh is a bit brighter than, for example, Bugman's Glow, which you can also use if you want, but for this one I'm going with the Night Questor. There's not much to go on, it's just the hands, the neck, the face, and that's it. Afterwards I'm going to highlight the raised areas with Kislev Flesh, and I'm doing it in a couple of stages. First I take a fine tip and apply some highlights, the forehead, the cheekbones, the nose, the chin, the knuckles, etc. And then create a wash of Kislev Flesh and go over it a couple of times to kind of blend those colors together. Once dry, I'm going over it again with some Carbro Crimson. I thinned it down quite a lot because I don't want a purple look, just some extra tones in there. And as an extra highlight, Kislev Flesh mixed with some Palette Witch Flesh for an extreme highlight just on the very tips of the knuckles, the tip of the nose, so eyebrows for example, cheekbones, just to make her look a little more pale. Then with some pure Palette Witch Flesh, I'm painting in the eyes. Always a very tricky part, but beautiful when you succeed in doing so. The pupils with Abaddon Black. And that completes our face. Now for the pants I'm using Incubi Darkness, and I darkened it down with some Abaddon Black in about a 50-50 mix. It combines really well with the greens we're going to use later on. And to highlight this I'm using pure Incubi Darkness. Just focus on the top areas and leave the bottom part nice and dark. Now to highlight this, I'm mixing some Palette Witch Flesh into the Incubi Darkness and just add some extreme highlights here and there. And we're now continuing on the main cloak or coat or whatever it's called, and I'm using Nocturne Green for this, which is a nice bluish green tone. It's quite dark, but I think it suits this model very well. There's a lot to cover here. Leave the middle, which is kind of a chainmail, leave that nice and black. And also do the boots in the same color. Now the chest piece I dry brushed with some Iron Breaker, or you can use any metal paint you have. I thought Lad Belcher would be a bit too dark, so I went for the Iron Breaker. And you can highlight it as much as you want by brighter colors. Next up is Castellan Green for the main part of the cloak. I painted almost everything, leaving some of the shadowy parts darker with the previous color, and covered most of it with this. It's a very slight gradual step from the previous color and it blends together really nice. And to highlight this, I'm mixing some Green Camo into the Castellan Green, and I'm focusing on the more pronounced areas, so the parts that would catch the most light or reflect the most. So the shoulders, the front of the chest piece, the wraps hanging below here, and the fine detail on the chest piece is also really nice if you can highlight that. And to give it a final detail, I'm using pure Ogrim camo. And as mentioned before, I focused on the chest piece and tried to draw in some fine lining there. Next is Rhinox hide for the wrist pads. I used pure Rhinox hide because I'm going to darken it down later on. But first I'm painting all the gold details with the Retributor armor. So that's the boots and the wrist pads. There's a nice pattern on the front of the boots here. I wanted to have some shiny details on this model. For these details, they have a bit of height, so if you hold your brush sideways, you can kind of stroke over it without touching the previously painted brown parts. So that's an easy way if you're not really comfortable with very, very fine detail, and you get a clean result. I next mix some dried bark and Abaddon black together as a base color for the bow. I then painted over it with some pure dried bark, just on the highlighted areas. And as an extra fine detail, I added some Baneblade brown to it. Next I painted the feathery part of the arrows with Doomble brown. It's nice to have these tiny details on your model with a completely different color than you used before. Because of course you can go with a traditional white feather look or a grayish feather look, but this way it stands out a little bit more to the rest of the model, and I like these kind of details. I painted the shafts with Steel Legion drab. I then covered Agrex Earthshade over the wrist pads and the feathers of the arrows. Next, some Leadbelcher on the knife. I like Leadbelcher because it's a nice cover, kind of a dark metal, and you can brighten it up later on. And then some Retributor armor on the hilt details of the knife. And I also use it on the back, which is kind of the scabbard of the knife, I guess. Then covered all the metal with null oil. And also the tips of the bow, which I painted with the metal color also. Tone that down a little bit. And afterwards, once dried, we're gonna brighten it up with some Stormhost silver and create some sharp edges. Then the hair is left. Rhinox hide as a base coat. There is a lot of hair. And it's one of the main characteristics of this model. So pay attention to it, because it's gonna stand out. Once dried, cover it with some Agrax Earthshade to get some shading in there. Then with a dry brush, I applied some Doomble Brown on all the raised areas. It gives it a nice red-brown look. Be careful around the face, because you don't want to destroy any of your details you did there before. And once I finished with the dry brush, I took my fine detail brush and painted some of the strands of hair by hand. And just picked out some hairs and gave them an extra go with the Doomble Brown, just to make them pop out a little bit more. Next I'm going to highlight that with some Scrag Brown, which is a nice complementary color. What you do here is just pick out some fine details. And focus on the top part of the hair. Again, you can hold your brush sideways as I'm doing here, which is kind of a dry brush technique. Then we're moving on to the tree trunk, rock art flesh for the inner part of the tree. I then use dried bark on the majority of the outer bark of this big tree log. And as normal wood goes, it does not have one main color. It's built up from many tints of brown. And that's what I'm going to try to achieve here as well. Usually when I paint these trunks, I never really know where I'm going to end. So I just try something, which is what I'm doing here as well. Now before I continue on the tree trunk, I painted the sands, the bottom, with dried bark mixed with some Abaddon black. And I picked out the stones lying on the floor with some Mechanicus standard gray. There's a couple of them lying around, just pick some here and there. There's some branches lying on the floor as well. Make sure to do that in the same color as you're doing the tree log. And there's this kind of mushroom thingy growing on the tree, and I painted that with some Karak stone. There's a couple below the tree trunk as well. They're not really visible, but it's a nice detail, isn't it? Next, some Baneblade Brown, and I dry brushed that on the bark. Holding your dry brush kind of sideways against the structure of the wood grains. Is that called a grain? I don't know. And with a fine detail brush, I picked out some of the more pronounced areas. So highlight that just to make it a bit more visible. And do the same with the branches lying on the floor. And here I tried something, and I'm quite happy with the result. I used snakebite leather, which is a contrast paint, but really thinned it down to give it a little bit more of a yellowy look. And what you can do is just dab it here and there, so you don't have to cover all of the tree trunk, but it gives a nice variation of browns. Then the base I covered with Nuln Oil. I then gave the stone, the rocks on the floor, some highlight with the Ministratum Grey. You can use different techniques here. You can outline the very sharp edges of the rocks. You can stipple some detail on it as well, because rocks are never smooth. They're always, well, they're rocky. Then with some rock art flesh, I dry brushed the sand on the bottom. And it's okay if you touch the stones here and there, because they're dirty, right? They're lying on the floor. So it's not a big deal if the colors mix here and there. I repeated this process with some palette witch flesh. Just focus on the tops, make sure you wipe off most of the paint of your dry brush. You want it to be almost clean before you do this, because you don't want any dabs of palette witch flesh on your painted base. And that's it. I applied some tufts of grass here and there to the model. You can do whatever you see fit. And we are done with Tauriel. I'm really happy with this result. I like how she turned out. She's dark but also kind of bright, and she is worthy of an elf. Well, I hope this video was of any help to you. Please leave a comment below if you like these kind of videos. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for watching again. I hope to see you in one of my next videos. So bye bye!